I would love for you to get your Bibles out and turn to John chapter 4. We're going to have a look together at this wonderful story. And you might want to even now pause the video and invite God to show you a fresh view of this passage. I know that you did that this week. God can yet again, His Word is living and active, and He can show us a fresh view each time we see this very same passage again and again. Before we actually get started, though, I really want to give a little bit of context to what Samaritans even are and what their history was with the Jews. The truth of the matter is, back when the Jews were released from captivity and were rebuilding their temple, the Samaritans wanted to participate in that, and the Jews would absolutely not let them. And so the Samaritans ended up building a rival temple, which was in turn destroyed by a Jewish king in 130 BC. The Samaritans, not to be deterred, determined that they would build yet another temple, and that was at Shechem. In any event, the Samaritans and the Jews were at enmity, bitter enmity with one another. They definitely did not see eye to eye. In fact, if a Jew wanted to get to the other side of Samaria, he would rarely go through. He would typically go around. That was just standard protocol. Going through wasn't typically considered an option. So that is the context for this story. And immediately we see in John chapter 4, verse 4, where Jesus had to go through Samaria. And that's an intriguing statement because having to go through Samaria makes you wonder. The typical route was not through. So why did Jesus have to go to Samaria? I believe it's specifically because he had a divine appointment with a woman in the middle of nowhere in Samaria. What was the woman like based upon what you see in the pages of your scriptures? If you could draw up a character trait list of this woman, what are some things that you might include on that list? Perhaps you would include that she seems like she has very little hope. She made her way to the well in the middle of the day, which isn't typical practice, so there was something unusual there. I think perhaps she didn't want to run into anybody else. Most women went in the cooler hours of the day and enjoyed the fellowship with other women while they were there. It was a social event. Was she relieved perhaps that nobody else was there, and why? Was it because of shame that she had in her life? Perhaps due to the lifestyle that she was living, which we learn about later on in the passage. Was she hiding from other people? Did this lady have any friends at all? You know, I think it's fascinating that Jesus met her there in midday. Coincidence? Hardly. I think it was a God-ordained divine appointment, frankly. Was she looking for affirmation from one man after another? Is that what she was caught in? Was she an affirmation addict, perhaps? Was she feeling ashamed at all that day of her immoral living? Or was this just protocol? Had she kind of numbed herself to the conscience that was inside of her that this wasn't the way she should be living? She may have been an outcast by other women. Was she lonely? Maybe she even thought she was too bad a case for God to even help. Maybe she thought that He didn't care for her. Yet, Jesus greets her at the well. The middle of the day, in the middle of nowhere, Jesus meets, he's a Jewish man, and he meets the Samaritan woman and has a conversation. Those are all big things. Each one individually would cause eyebrows to raise. The encounter at the well is, in my opinion, living proof that our God is loving and compassionate and caring and merciful and gracious. You get the idea. It's proof, too, of the divine and. The divine and is something I want to challenge you to investigate in your own life. It looks like this. A woman, such as the one in our story, can be living a sinful life and God pursues her. To bring it home, perhaps we could say, we can be face first in a bag of Oreos and our God passionately embraces us. We can fail and fail and fail again, and Jesus forgives. In fact, the divine and can even work like this. I can struggle with bulimic tendencies and be crazy about God too. That divine and, we tend to think we disqualify ourselves. How could I possibly be a lover of God when I tend to do these terrible things to my body? If you love God, you love God. And there's somehow both and in there. So there's a divine and. What divine and do you need to believe God for in your life? You know, Jesus stirred a thirst in this woman specifically so that she would long for a drink of living water, the water that Jesus is. In John 4:15, the woman said to him, after having her thirst tendered, I guess you could say, is, "Sir, give me this water so that I won't be thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water." I think this passage kind of shows us the truth of her condition. It isn't so much that she doesn't want to do the work involved in carrying water back home. It's more likely that she doesn't want the heartache of being ostracized. And never was it more obvious what her true condition was than when she was near people and was treated differently because of the kind of life that she led. She no doubt led a very sinful life based upon what Jesus says here. Maybe the well was even a reminder of not just her shame, but of her loss, of her pain, of the sin and what it cost her, or even a lack of hope. That might be why she wanted to not ever have to come back here again. I mean, it says, "Sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming back here again." She didn't want to have to keep coming back. She may not have wanted to be at the well simply because the burden of being there in her shame was heavier even than the burden of carrying water. Can you relate? I remember being extremely overweight, and I was getting on a tiny little commuter plane as a connection to my destination. And it was such a small plane that on either side of the aisle, you had 2 seats on one side of the aisle and only 1 on the other. And they were tiny little seats. Not like your normal airplane seat. I mean, it was a small little plane for a puddle jump type thing. And I remember getting on, and this man bored holes through me with his gaze. And I remember feeling that he had such contempt for me. And I instantly knew, I just knew it was because of my size. Another thing that I remember, another embarrassing situation for me, was when I was on a church softball team. And I was very large, and I was an athlete, but at that time I didn't look like an athlete, like we typically think of athletes looking. And I got up to bat, and the whole outfield, and the infield for that matter, moved way in. They were convinced that the big girl couldn't hit a ball. Well, that worked to my favor because I hit it over their heads, and I'm sure they thought I couldn't run either, but I hit it so well that I could easily make it into a home run. I did that twice in that game before they got the idea of moving back. I was humiliated by that, though. I felt awful. I felt like it was all on display. Fat girl at bat, or something like that. I mean, it was a terrible feeling. Everything changed for this woman, the woman in John chapter 4, after she had her encounter with Jesus. Instead of literal water, Jesus, of course, gave her something that bubbled up from deep within her, and it was freedom from shame. That was even better than what she thought she needed. She had a new hope. Jesus surpassed her expectations and her hopes. I'm convinced that he wants to do the same for us. I'm convinced that he wants to surpass our expectations and our hopes. He also, I think this is so neat, to a Samaritan woman, he revealed his true identity in verses 25 and 26. And I won't read those for you, but you can look at them yourself. After her encounter with Jesus, she stepped out of shame and came out of hiding. She left her water jar, which she said she wanted filled, right? That's what she said she wanted or needed. But what she really needed was freedom from shame. She stepped out of shame, out of hiding, and left her water jar and rushed back to the very people with whom she hadn't wanted to associate because of perhaps being ostracized by them or labeled by them or whatever. She wanted to tell them about Jesus. Talk about a huge turnaround. She said, "Come and see a man who told me everything that I've ever done. Could this be the Christ?" That's in verse 29 in John chapter 4. You know, we may feel we have sinned just too many times for God. And we might think he impatiently taps his toe. waiting for us to get our acts together. Is your hope gone? Do you ever wonder if God stands poised with lightning bolt in hand, ready to throw it if you don't get your act together, if you mess up just one more time? That is not our God. Jesus said that when you have seen me, you have seen the Father. So when we look at the way Jesus was, like he was in John chapter 4, that is what our God is like. That tenderness, that loving kindness, that gentleness. Do you try to perform to win God's heart? Are you struggling with thinking God will never accept you? Well, that's a lie. The truth is you can't do anything to cause him to love you. You can't win his heart. You've already got it. You can't woo him. In fact, you have his heart. You are his bride. He's chosen you. He's wooed you. You love him only because he first loved you. We have a lot of lessons that we learn from the woman at the well. She thought she wanted water. And so the conversation with Jesus proved what she deeply, truly wanted and what she needed. It was something deeper. You may think that you want to become thin or that you need to become thin. But I believe Jesus wants to use this just like he used the well in her life. He wants to use this in your life to show you your true need and what your heart's greatest desire even is. Is it possible that God is using your physical challenges with food in your body to lead you to an encounter with him like he did the woman at the well, using her need, her thirst, her physical thirst for water? Is he using this to draw you to come to him to get what you really need? He knows all about you. He knows your history, your shame, your hopes, your dreams, your true need. He, like the woman, he chooses now for an encounter with you. He used the woman in this story to bring the gospel to her entire village. Is it possible that he may, as he heals you, want to use you to bring a message of hope and healing to others that even now you don't feel comfortable with? That's a crazy thought, isn't it? It kind of can sprain our brain. Set that aside if you need to, or bring it to God in prayer. That might be the best place for it. The primary hunger that we focused on just now certainly was her heart hunger. And our authors want us to have a look on page 62 of our workbooks at a chart that's there and evaluate what emotions or feelings do you experience when you have head hunger going on? What thoughts do you experience? How do you respond to this hunger? We're all speaking about head hunger. I'd love for you to take time to fill that out if you haven't already. And heart hunger. What emotions or feelings do you experience with heart hunger? What thoughts do you experience with heart hunger? And how do you respond to heart hunger? And then finally, stomach hunger. You know, here's something that not everybody is aware of. Many of us, when we feel physical hunger, it results in an emotional response of fear sometimes, or agitation, or worry. And you may not have any idea why that's the case. I want to challenge you and invite you to prayerfully invite God into that feeling. Sometime when you're physically hungry and that emotion comes to the surface, to ask God to show you what the root of that is and to trust that he's going to show you what is behind it and that he will be all you need in that particular need as well. What thoughts do you experience when you are experiencing stomach hunger, and how do you respond to stomach hunger? Those are all things that the authors would like us, before we close out of this week's material, to have a look at. So would you do that? What kind of heart hunger then do you most frequently encounter, and how have you usually dealt with it? How do you think you can deal with it, or how should you deal with it? Or what is an ideal way of dealing with it? Are there any other heartaches that God wants to heal in you? We all have so very many. How can we be praying for you? I hope that as you close the material this week, that you wouldn't think of this as a chapter done and set aside. Please feel free to come back to it and continue to invite God to continue his work in you as he's healing you and encouraging you as you move forward. He wants to do a new thing in you, and that means in your heart as well as in your body. So simply, I hope you'll invite him to do that work. Continue to invite him to do that work.